There are things in the ocean that don't just want to be found. They want to be remembered. When a Navy rescue diver is sent to recover a missing submarine in the darkest trench of the Pacific, he uncovers more than twisted steel and drowned silence. What he finds lurking in the abyss is neither human nor forgiving. This isn't a story about what we discovered beneath the sea. It's about what followed us back. Dive deep, but remember, some calls from the deep aren't meant to be answered. This is S-18. Hull breached. We're sinking. Please. The transmission ended in a burst of static, as if the ocean itself had swallowed the voice. It had been 20 minutes since the emergency call came through. I was still fastening the final strap on my pressure suit when Commander Halverson handed me the device. "That's the last thing we heard from them," he said, his voice tight, eyes avoiding mine. I pressed play again. The voice on the recorder was frantic, clipped, almost guttural in its desperation. "This is S-18. Hull breached. We're sinking. Please." And then nothing but white noise. Cold, wet static. Didn't need the confirmation. I'd already heard it 6 times. But something about hearing it again while staring at the dark blue hull of the rescue sub made it real. Tangible. Unforgiving. Jackson stood beside me, slipping on his gloves with a practiced ease that betrayed a hint of nervousness in his hands. "How deep?" he asked. 1,500 meters, Halverson replied. "They were testing equipment near the perimeter of the trench. We lost them not long after they crossed the fault line." Jackson looked at me. "That's deep." I nodded. "Too deep for anything commercial. The S-18's rated for 2,000. It should have held." "Until something hit it," I murmured. Halverson didn't flinch. "Your objective is search and rescue. If they're alive, bring them up. If not, secure the black box and get out. Do not linger. Understood?" The last part hung in the air too long. "Do not linger" wasn't standard language in a rescue operation. Neither was the look in Halverson's eyes. Stern, yes, but hollow too. Like he'd seen something in the data he wasn't allowed to share. Jackson gave a half salute. "Understood, sir." The sub-Dolphin was a sleek metallic spearhead of modern engineering. Compact, reinforced, and fitted with a detachable pressure chamber for docking against other submarines. Normally it was used for deep salvage work or military surveillance, not rescue. Not like this. Inside the walls were a claustrophobic gunmetal gray. The cockpit was small, barely wide enough for Jackson and me to sit side by side. Sonar systems lined the panel, flickering with waiting silence. "Seal the hatch," Jackson said. I reached over, flipped the lever. The hydraulic hiss sealed our fate. Outside, the sounds of the base faded into nothingness. We began our descent. The ocean wrapped around us like a throat closing in. Sunlight fractured and then disappeared within the first 200 meters. A blue haze gave way to velvet dark. At 500 meters, the Dolphin creaked. At 800 meters, my ears popped. At 1,000 meters, I started to feel it. The pressure not just on the hull, but on my chest, on my thoughts. The kind of silence that makes you think too hard. The kind that doesn't echo. I looked at Jackson. "You ever go this deep before?" He shook his head. 900 once. That was just for training. This, he gestured toward the black window, where the faint outline of a lanternfish darted past like a flickering demon. "This is new." I tried to smile. "At least we're not heading into the abyssal trench." "Just the slope." "Yeah, just." He laughed dryly, checking the depth gauge. 1,350 meters and dropping. Still no contact. The radio hissed. "Dolphin, this is command. We've locked onto the GPS ping of S-18. Signal is weak but holding. Bearing 186. Depth 1490. Jackson adjusted course. "Copy that." The lights on the outside hull pierced the darkness in thick beams, like spears against a void. The only thing more oppressive than the dark was the nothing. No fish, no life, not even the rhythmic pulse of sonar bouncing off terrain. Just flatline readings and black. "We should be seeing something," Jackson muttered. "Wreckage, debris, anything." I leaned forward, squinting at the monitor. Maybe it slid. Where? The question had no good answer. There weren't supposed to be any slopes steep enough for that kind of slide, unless the maps were wrong or old. I hated that idea more than I admitted. At 1490 meters, we got our first visual. There. I pointed. Something massive loomed in the gloom, a dark outline against an even darker backdrop. The S-18. She lay half buried in the seabed, nose tilted down as if frozen mid-dive. Her hull was shredded, torn in long, jagged streaks that looked like claw marks or teeth. I didn't want to think about which was worse. Looks like she got hit hard, Jackson said, maneuvering us around the wreck. Port side breach, external damage. The sonar pinged once, then again. A sharp spike. Movement. We froze. Jackson muted the systems. What was that? I asked. Could be debris or what? He didn't answer. We hovered in silence just above the crippled vessel. I exhaled and reached for the remote manipulator. Let's retrieve the black box. Jackson didn't move. Do you feel that? I paused. My hands hovered over the controls. Feel what? He turned to me slowly, like we're being watched. I opened my mouth to dismiss it, then I saw it. Not on the sonar, not on the camera feed, just a flash in the viewport. A flicker of something smooth, pale, moving fast, darting just beyond the reach of our lights. I turned to Jackson. He had already started whispering. This is S-18. Hull breached. We're sinking. Please. He wasn't even aware he was repeating it. The same cadence, the same desperation. I grabbed his shoulder. Hey, Jackson, snap out of it. He blinked. What? You were saying the distress call. I didn't mean to. He looked scared, and so was I. The lights dimmed, just for a second, long enough for me to wonder if we just crossed some invisible line, long enough to ask myself the question I'd been avoiding. What if the S-18 didn't just sink? What if something dragged it down? The ocean was never meant to be explored. Jackson ran another sonar sweep, hand shaking just slightly over the controls. The console blinked erratically, every pulse returning clean. Nothing but the cold silence of the deep. No movement, no echo, no explanation. I swear I saw something, I said quietly, still staring at the viewport. The water outside pressed against the thick glass like an endless ink-black wall. A single flick of movement out there, just beyond where the light reached, had changed the entire tone of the mission. Jackson glanced over. You think something's still out there? I think something was always out there. He didn't reply, just tightened his grip on the control stick and focused forward. I turned my attention to the wreckage of the S-18. Its hull, once gleaming and precise, now looked like it had been mangled by a god. Chunks of metal curled inward, not outward. No explosion then. It wasn't something from within. Something had struck from the outside, hard. The manipulator arm extended with a sluggish groan. Through the grainy camera feed, I watched the claw grip the emergency beacon mounted to the wreck's side panel. One quick twist, and the device detached. We brought it in through the intake compartment. Just as I reached for the beacon's casing to remove the black box from its compartment, the sub lurched. It was subtle, maybe even unnoticeable to someone without our training, but Jackson and I both knew the dolphin had just shifted in the water. And not because of any current. We looked at each other, didn't say a word. Another sonar ping. This one, different. Like something was bouncing back that shouldn't be there. Could be a displacement echo, Jackson murmured, trying to convince himself. No, that's close. Less than 30 meters. Then it happened again. The faint lurch, the almost imperceptible tilt of the sub's nose. I checked the external cameras. Nothing, just the ocean, still and black. And then a light, one small, pulsing red beacon, far below. Jackson narrowed his eyes. That's not from the S-18. He was right. The beacon was moving, not floating, moving, tracking across the bottom like it had purpose. Another emergency beacon? I asked. No, those don't move like that. It danced through the darkness in slow hypnotic flashes. Then a second light appeared, and a third, each one blinking on for a few seconds, dim, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. The lights formed a line, slowly descending along a trench carved deep into the seafloor like an open wound in the earth. "Son of a bitch," Jackson whispered. "There's something else down there." I didn't speak. We both knew what this meant. If that was another vessel, it was either military and very classified, or it was something that had been down here long before us. I opened the emergency beacon's casing and slid the black box into the input port on the main console. Lights blinked. Data streamed. It wasn't just telemetry, there was a video file. Jackson and I leaned in. The timestamp on the video matched the final minutes of the S-18's last known contact. The screen lit up with chaos, a first-person perspective, Conley's helmet cam rushing through the corridors of the S-18 as the red lights of emergency power pulsed around him. Alarms screeched. Voices screamed. Water burst from a seam in the hull as the pressure breached. Shadows darted just beyond the flashlight beam. And then it stopped. Conley entered the emergency escape pod, slapped the hatch shut, pressed launch. The pod detached. A moment of weightlessness. Then the screaming began again, but not from the radio. From the water, something shrieked. Something huge, not human, not even close. A flash of pale gray outside the viewport. Long, serpentine, like a swimmer 10 times the length of a blue whale. The creature passed in the blink of an eye. A mass of fins, tail, and impossible geometry that made my stomach twist. It moved with intelligence, with calculation. Then came the bang. The pod shook. Water gushed in from a fractured seam. Conley gasped, cursed, slammed the emergency distress button. As the depth meter began to climb again, showing the pod rising toward the surface, the pod suddenly stopped. A high-pitched screech cut through the video feed. Metal on metal, like claws dragging across a coffin lid. The final frame before blackout was a blurred image of a face pressing against the view. No mouth, no nose, just those obsidian eyes, cold and endless. And then, that's it. Darkness. The feed cut out. Neither of us spoke, until Jackson whispered, "That wasn't natural. That wasn't from Earth." The sub jolted again, harder this time. Sonar pulsed and returned to form. Not a light, not a beacon. A body just outside the wreck, floating, missing an arm, torn wetsuit, part of the torso half missing, helmet shattered, face frozen in a mask of horror, but still drifting, still watching. Jackson's voice trembled. "Is that Conley?" I didn't answer. He was holding something in his remaining hand. A camera, still intact. We extended the manipulator arm again. As we retrieved the device, a low thump echoed through the water, not from machinery, not from the dolphin, from below. The seafloor shifted. Sonar flashed. Something massive, unmapped, was moving in the trench. Jackson looked pale. The ground, it moved. "No," I said, staring at the sonar screen. The trench opened. That's when the console lit up. The emergency system blared. A new signal was coming through. S-18? But this one was coming from deeper, far deeper. I checked the coordinates. 800 meters below us, I said. Jackson turned slowly, eyes wide with disbelief. "That's beneath the ocean floor." I nodded, my throat dry. Then something dug. We stared at the screen in silence, the signal continuing to beep, steady and strong. The very last thing either of us wanted to do was follow it, but I already knew we would. The first time I heard it, I thought it was a glitch in the sonar. The second time I realized it was singing. The sound filtered through the water in soft pulses. High, crystalline tones that didn't belong here, not at this depth, not in this silence. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't the groan of metal under pressure. It was melodic, fluid, human, adjacent. Jackson killed the external mic feed, his fingers trembling. "Did you hear that?" I asked. He nodded slowly, eyes locked on the screen. It came from below. From the same trench? No. He paused. It came from everywhere. The sonar kept sweeping, but there was nothing on the display except us, the carcass of the S-18, and a whole lot of nothing stretching downward into the black. But something was there. I didn't know how I knew. I just did. You sure it wasn't just the equipment? I offered, though I didn't believe it myself. Jackson shook his head. No, it wasn't interference. I could hear words, or something like them, like they wanted to sound like words, but didn't understand what words are. That's when I started to feel it, like pressure behind my eyes, a low buzzing in my skull. Not pain, something else, a kind of hum that threaded into the space between thought and fear. Let's move, I said. I want to see where that signal came from. 800 meters, straight down. Jackson hesitated. We're already well past safe limits. Then we stay in the trench's shadow. We don't descend, just observe. But even as I said it, I knew we'd go lower. There was something about that voice, hypnotic, invasive, like it knew our names. We powered forward, navigating around the twisted wreck of the S-18. The lights cast flickering shadows across the seabed, revealing gashes in the earth and half-buried objects. Helmets, tools, bits of gear. It looked less like a crash site and more like a graveyard. Are those other vessels? Jackson asked, pointing to a shape mostly buried in sediment. I squinted. It wasn't a submarine, not completely. Its lines were wrong. It looked more like a pod, organic in shape, covered in barnacles and algae. No markings, no lights, no windows. I made a note of the coordinates. As we drifted along the slope, something brushed against the sub. A gentle bump. We both froze. I turned the camera to the side. A trail of bubbles rose up alongside the dolphin, slowly at first, then in a frantic swirl. Something just released air, Jackson said. That shouldn't happen at this depth, I muttered. Not unless. The camera swung downward. Below us, wedged between two slabs of rock, was a partially crumpled diver's body. His suit was torn open. The oxygen tank split down the middle like a peeled banana. His helmet shattered, but his face, is he? Smiling, Jackson whispered. He was. A twisted, impossible grin stretched from cheek to cheek. His eyes bulged open in the mask, clouded with death, but somehow knowing. I backed the camera away. We didn't speak. What was there to say? Instead, we pushed deeper into the trench mouth. The dolphin creaked around us like a coffin settling in the dirt. The walls of the trench grew narrower, darker, less natural. It was as if the ocean had cracked and bled into a vein meant to stay closed. That's when we saw it. A glow, not red, not the usual emergency signal. This was green fuel, rhythmic and slow. It pulsed along the trench wall in long, spiraling streaks like phosphorescent veins. They look carved, Jackson said, like someone etched them in. Or something. We brought the dolphin in closer. The lights responded. Each time the sub's floodlights pulsed, the blue-green glow flared back, like it was mimicking us, or answering. Is this some kind of communication? I asked. Jackson didn't respond. I turned to him. He was sitting stiffly, head tilted slightly, lips moving silently. What are you doing? No answer. Jackson? Still nothing. I reached over and grabbed his arm. He blinked, once, then looked at me like I was a stranger. You were saying something. I was listening, he murmured. She's not angry. Who? He stared at me for a long moment before replying. The one who sings. Before I could ask more, the sonar beeped again, and this time there was a return, movement, coming from below, slow and deliberate. Then something appeared on the camera feed just for a second. A hand, human-shaped, pale, clawed. It reached from the trench wall and slid back behind a ridge, like it had never been there. Jackson whispered, "She's showing us the way." I stared into the dark, into the trench that was beginning to look less like a geological formation and more like a pathway, and I began to understand what I had feared since we started this descent. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a summoning. The trench narrowed the deeper we went, not in the way of collapsing walls or constricting rock, but in sensation. The water felt thicker, more resistant, as if the very ocean didn't want us to move forward. Or worse, something else was deciding how far we could go. Jackson hadn't spoken in over 5 minutes. He sat hunched in his seat, eyes flicking occasionally to the sonar, to the camera feed, to nothing at all. His fingers tapped in erratic rhythm against the control panel, 3 short taps, then 2 long, then silence. "Are you okay?" I asked. He flinched, like he hadn't realized I was still there. "I can still hear her," he said, "in my head." "The singing?" He nodded. "It's not noise. It's not a voice, even. It's thought. It's like she's not speaking, she's remembering." A chill crawled up my spine. I glanced at the pressure readings. Still stable, temperature normal, but nothing about this place felt normal. The walls of the trench were now jagged with markings, less like sedimentary erosion and more like intentional design, spirals, interlocking symbols, not random. "They built this," Jackson muttered. "She built this." I checked the sonar again. Something moved at the edge of the scan, too large to be biological, but too fluid to be mechanical. It vanished before I could lock onto it. We reached a wide chamber, an opening in the trench, a sort of underwater cul-de-sac, and in the center, illuminated by our lights, was what remained of another submarine. Not S-18, not American. I recognized Cyrillic markings along the torn hull. A Soviet vessel? I breathed. "That's not possible." Jackson squinted. "K-129, that's a real one. Lost in '68. They said it exploded." "It didn't explode," I said. "It was taken." The vessel was hollowed out, sides peeled open like a can. No bodies, no remains. Just the faint echo of something that had once been inside and had left hungry. I activated the external mic again. Static, at first. Then, humming. The same hunting tone. The pitch rose slowly, almost like a breath being drawn, and I swore for a moment. It shaped itself into a name, my name. I killed the audio and recoiled. She just said my name. Jackson didn't even blink. "That means she knows you now." I stared at him. "What the hell does that mean?" He smiled, but it wasn't a human smile. His eyes were wide, too wide, pupils dilated, face pale. "She remembers everyone who comes down here," he said. "She learns, she listens, and she never forgets." "Jackson, you're scaring me." "Good," he said. "You should be scared." He suddenly reached forward and pushed the control throttle forward. The dolphin surged ahead, deeper into the trench, toward a glow we hadn't seen before. "Stop!" I shouted. "What are you doing?" "She's calling," he said. "You don't ignore the call." I fought him for control, grabbing at the panel, trying to reverse course. The sub jerked sideways as we wrestled with the commands. Lights flickered, sonar spiked. Then, impact. We struck something beneath us, hard. The whole cabin shook violently. A sharp crack echoed through the hull. The lights died. Darkness swallowed everything. No sound, no power, just the groaning breath of the sea squeezing against the metal shell of our coffin. Then, a light. Not ours. From outside, dull, pulsing blue light growing closer. I backed away from the viewport, heart thudding. "Jackson, what is that?" He didn't answer. He was staring forward, eyes unfocused, mouth slightly open. Then he started whispering again. But not English. The sounds were low, guttural, too fluid to be words. His voice wasn't his own. And that's when the shape appeared in the light. Outside the glass, drifting closer, was a figure, feminine, slender, moving like seaweed in a current. Her hair floated in long black strands. Her arms were thin and too long. Her skin was pale as bone. But her face, no eyes, no mouth, only skin, stretched smooth like a blank canvas. And yet somehow, I knew she was looking directly at me. The sub's backup power kicked on. Emergency lights blinked alive, bathing everything in red. She vanished in an instant, like mist in a storm. Jackson gasped and slumped forward, unconscious. I reached over and checked his pulse. Strong, steady. Whatever had taken hold of him was gone, for now. The sonar blinked again, a new reading. A structure, just below, a perfect circle carved into the seafloor. At its center, a spire, built of black stone, covered in the same spiral markings that lined the trench. And on the sonar screen, just barely readable above the signal noise, was a new distress call. "This is S-18. We're not alone down here." And then, silence. A single word appeared on the screen in Cyrillic. Prinoshini. I stared at the screen, then at Jackson, then at the spire below, and I understood. We hadn't been sent here to rescue anyone. We were the next ones to be offered. I saw her face pressed against the glass. There were no eyes, no mouth, but somehow she was smiling. The image hadn't left me, not even after the backup power flickered on, and the emergency system stabilized. That blank humanoid face still floated in the back of my mind like a burn that wouldn't heal. She hadn't looked through me. She had looked into me. Jackson remained unconscious, slumped against his console. His breathing was steady but shallow. I checked his vitals once more. Pulse normal. Eyes closed. He didn't even twitch when I shook him. I should have felt relief. I didn't. I glanced out the viewport again. The trench had grown impossibly narrow, like a throat closing in around us. Stone walls glistened with veins of bioluminescence, their glow pulsing with the same rhythm as the sonar. It almost felt like the rock itself was breathing. The spire on the sonar still read beneath us. Black stone, spiral architecture, almost cathedral-like in scale and placement. Its readings made no sense. The sonar interpreted it as hollow in some parts and living in others, a man-made structure at nearly 3,000 meters. No one had built that. Not anyone human. The word still sat at the edge of the screen. Prino Shenii. Offering. Who or what was receiving that offering? I pulled the throttle back gently, testing the propulsion. The sub groaned, resisted, not mechanically. External. Something was pulling us downward. I fired a test burst on the vertical thrusters. The dolphin lifted 2 meters, then dropped 5. I swore and throttled again. This time, nothing. Just a soft whine and a slow, inevitable drift downward. We were being drawn toward the spire. "Jackson," I whispered, hoping for a response. "I need you, man." "Wake up!" He didn't move. Instead, the mic crackled. Static, then a voice. But not a recorded one. Live. Wet. Whispered, "Come home." I froze. It wasn't Jackson's voice. It wasn't mine. It wasn't human. I shut off the comm feed, but the whisper didn't stop. It was inside the sub. No, inside my head. Something thudded against the sub's underside. Not a rock, not debris. Deliberate. A slow, testing tap, then another. Knuckles rapping on a coffin lid. I spun the external cameras to check the hull. Nothing. Then again. Just as I turned one lens, a hand. Pale, long-fingered, pressed to the glass. It didn't move, just hovered, as if daring me to open the hatch. It faded after a few seconds. Like fog and moonlight, I wanted to scream. Instead, I checked the emergency data port. We still had the black box from the S-18. If I could extract the core telemetry and get to the surface, I might still... A knock. 3 times, sharp, intentional, from inside the airlock. I spun around. The status panel blinked. Manual override, engaged. That wasn't possible. The only way to trigger the manual airlock was from the inside, or with a matching biometric key. And the only other person aboard? I looked back at Jackson. He was still unconscious, but now his mouth was moving, not speaking, mimicking. The same rhythm of knocks. 3 short, pause, then again. I grabbed the override lever and slammed it into lock mode, and the panel hissed and turned red. I slumped against the wall, heart pounding. Outside the sub, the glowing spire came into full view. Our floodlights finally illuminated its form fully, if such a thing could be described in human terms. It wasn't just architecture, it was organic. The spiral markings writhed, moving ever so slightly, like veins under a thin layer of skin. Tiny pulses of light flickered from within, like bioluminescent breath. At its center, the spire opened into a dark maw, circular, yawning, inviting. The dolphin stopped descending, not because we had control, because something wanted us to stop. I stared at the maw and felt a coldness settle in my bones. Not just fear, recognition. We weren't the first ones to see this. The S-18, the Soviet sub. Maybe more. They had all been drawn here, just like us. Not because they were unlucky, because they were chosen. I turned back to Jackson, and for a moment, just a moment, his eyes opened, and they were no longer his. Completely black, glossy, empty. Then he smiled. "Jackson?" I whispered, my voice cracking as if it didn't want to be heard. "You with me?" He just sat there, staring. That smile stayed frozen across his face, wide and stretched unnaturally, like a marionette's mouth drawn tight on invisible strings. His blackened eyes didn't blink. They didn't move. But I could feel him watching me. Not Jackson. Something else behind that face. I took one slow step back, reaching for the emergency manual control embedded in the wall. His lips parted, and the voice that came out was not his. "You should not have come." I stopped breathing. "Jackson?" I said again, already knowing it was pointless. He tilted his head slowly to one side, like studying an insect. "She chose you." My skin prickled. "Who is she?" He said nothing. Instead, he raised his hand and pressed his palm flat against the inner wall of the sub. Fingers splayed like the thing we had seen on the exterior. A dark film spread out from his skin, a viscous, oily imprint that shimmered faintly under the red lights. I didn't wait. I lunged for the override console and slammed the emergency sedative injection protocol. A mechanical hiss. A soft click. Jackson jerked once, twitched, and then collapsed, body slumping sideways onto the console, unconscious once more. The black faded from his eyes, the smile disappeared, but the mark on the wall remained. It writhed, a pulsing spiral. It was identical to the ones carved into the trench wall and the spire below, except now it was inside the sub. I sealed the cockpit doors behind me and backed away toward the emergency systems console. I had one objective now. Get the black box, the camera, from the body and leave, even if I had to abandon the dolphin, even if I had to surface manually in a pressurized suit. I was done. Whatever this was, it had gone beyond reason, beyond mission, beyond survival. I opened the camera's data core and connected it to the sub's display. The footage was shaky, chaotic, Conley's last moments, again. But this time I noticed something new. Just before he launched his escape pod, he turned to someone, another crew member, face smeared in blood, and screamed, "Don't let her in. Don't answer. Don't sing back." Then the pod closed, and the screams disappeared into the void. Don't sing back. What did that mean? The thought barely had time to take shape before the sonar pinged again, and this time, the return wasn't vague or distant. It was right outside. I activated the external cameras. The trench was gone. No wall, no spire, no seafloor, just her. She filled the entire viewport. Head tilted forward, that blank pale face inches from the glass. Hair billowed like smoke in still water, flowing upward and outward, no features. Yet I knew she was smiling. A humming began, vibrating in the glass. It wasn't audible, it was felt. It passed through the hull, through the seat, through my bones. My vision blurred, my hands went cold. Then, a second voice joined hers. From inside the sub, I turned slowly. Jackson was standing again, smiling, singing. It wasn't a song in any language I knew, just tones perfectly matched to hers in rising and falling patterns. It was like a duet from a dream you shouldn't remember, or a memory you never lived. "Stop!" I rasped. "You don't know what you're doing." His eyes turned to me, and for a split second I saw Jackson in there again. Just a glimpse. "I can't stop," he said, trembling. "She's in me." And then the sub began to descend again. No engine, no thrusters. We were falling. The trench had opened wider, unnaturally wide, impossibly wide, and something beneath us pulled with a force greater than gravity, like a breath drawing us in. The cockpit lights flickered. Sparks burst from one panel. An alarm blared. Structural stress exceeding safety parameters. I made a choice. I initiated the emergency ascent beacon. If the sub was lost, at least someone topside might hear us, find the data, know what happened. The beacon launched upward like a flare, its sonar ping echoing as it climbed. Jackson screamed. The sound was wrong. It wasn't human anymore. It echoed in multiple tones, layered, like something else inside his body had screamed too. The viewport cracked. Just one thin, sharp line, but it was enough. Water beaded on the inside, and then she spoke. Not through the mic, not through Jackson. She spoke directly into me. "You have seen too much, but I want you to remember. I want you to carry me up." The crack deepened. My breath caught in my throat. She was no longer watching me through the glass. She was inside. The first thing I saw when I opened my eyes was blood suspended in water. Perfectly still, perfectly red, like it was waiting. For a moment, I thought I was still in the sub, still sinking, still in the dream. Then the pain hit, real, sharp, and screaming from my shoulder. I gasped and choked, coughing up seawater as two strong arms pulled me onto a hard metal surface. Lights above, a ceiling, shouts, radios crackling, voices too loud, too fast. "Get him stable." "Where's the other one? Where's Jackson? God, his eyes, look at his goddamn eyes." I tried to speak, but all that came out was a rasp. A familiar voice leaned close. "Will, you're safe. You're on the links. We picked up your beacon. You made it, man." Jackson. The name hit me like ice water. I bolted upright despite the pain, grabbing the nearest arm. "Where's Jackson?" I croaked. "Did he come back?" The medic shook his head. There was no one else. I was kept in the medical bay for 2 days under sedation, restrained for my own safety. They said I was hallucinating, said I was suffering from nitrogen narcosis, trauma-induced psychosis, exhaustion. They didn't understand, because they hadn't seen her, because they hadn't heard the song. But something inside me knew. I hadn't come back alone. By day 3, I was released to debrief. Dr. Meredith Harlan, NOAA's senior deep-sea protocol officer, sat across from me in the interrogation room, flanked by a man in a Navy uniform who never gave his name and never blinked. "Tell us exactly what happened after your descent past 3,000 meters, she said, voice calm but eyes sharp. I paused. If I told them the truth, the real truth, they'd label me unstable, discharge me, or worse. But if I didn't? Jackson's face flashed in my mind, that smile, those eyes, and her voice in my head. Carry me up. I told them everything, the trench, the carvings, the humming, Jackson changing, the thing outside the sub. When I finished, they said nothing, just close the file. The man in uniform finally spoke. "You're not the first." My skin prickled. "What do you mean?" He slid a photo across the table. Grainy, black and white. A crew of 4 in old Navy dive suits standing beside a submersible marked S-18. My breath caught. That sub was decommissioned in 1982 after its final dive into the same coordinates, Harlan said. None of the crew returned. Then how? He cut me off. The footage you recovered matches logs we thought were lost. Ritualistic markings, contact behavior, auditory resonance with unknown frequency patterns. They had known. They had been watching. That night, they moved me to quarantine in a secure wing of the offshore research platform. It was supposedly for observation, but I could feel the difference. No more doctors, no windows, only cameras. That's when the dreams started again. She was clearer now, closer. I could feel her in my veins, pulsing like ocean tides behind my eyes. And sometimes, I saw Jackson, standing in the corner, not moving, just watching. On the 5th night, the platform lost power for 13 minutes. Just 13. But when it came back, one of the guards was gone. The cameras in my room went to static, and on the wall above my bed, a spiral was drawn in water and blood, pulsing, alive. I tried to tell them, tried to scream, but the door never opened again. The days blurred into each other. I stopped counting them after the lights stopped following any logical cycle. They told me I was under observation, that I needed time to reintegrate. But the truth scratched beneath my skin like barnacles digging into hull plating. I wasn't being rehabilitated, I was being monitored. I started hearing it at night. A low hum, like the ocean's own pulse, coming from somewhere behind the walls. Sometimes it vibrated through the bed frame, through my teeth, into the cavities of my skull. And always, the spiral above my bed would shimmer faintly, pulsing in time with the sound. No one ever came to clean it. No one ever acknowledged it. Then I began speaking in my sleep. At first, it was just murmurs, indistinct. Then, full sentences, but not in English, not in any human language. I saw the proof on a small, circular mirror they left in my room. Maybe by accident, I'd stare into it, watching my mouth move when I wasn't speaking. Words bubbling up, ancient and fluid, like breath drawn from deep water. I didn't know the meaning, but I felt them. They weren't mine, they were hers. Eventually, Dr. Harlan returned, but not alone. A new man followed her in. Civilian clothes, clean-shaven, leather notebook and eyes like dull metal. He never introduced himself. "Will," Harlan said, taking a chair, "we're going to try something different." The man set down a small recorder and simply nodded. "You've been speaking something," she continued. "It matches phonetic elements found on the recovered sub's log. We want to know what it means." I laughed, dry and cracked. "You think I know?" The man leaned forward. "We don't think. We know." He slid a sheet of paper across the table. Symbols. Dozens of them. Some matched what I'd seen in the trench. Others I'd scratched into my bed frame without realizing. At the bottom was a rough translation. "Open the skin of the world." My throat dried. "You've been trying to translate this," he said calmly. "You don't remember, but we've been watching. You've drawn the same markings every time your vitals spike." Harlan looked genuinely uneasy now. "We believe there is an intelligence attempting to interface through you." I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, but not from fear. From anticipation. That night, I dreamed of Jackson. He was underwater, standing perfectly still, surrounded by black silt. His mouth moved, but there were no bubbles, no sound. I leaned closer, and suddenly I understood. He wasn't speaking. He was chanting. I woke up with salt water in my lungs. The room was flooded to my knees. No alarms blared. No one came. The spiral above the bed had widened, twisting further than before, touching the ceiling. Something shimmered beneath its wet ink. An eye, maybe. Watching. The walls groaned like ship hulls under pressure. Something was trying to push through. That night I gave in. I knelt in the water, raised my hands, and let the words spill from my mouth. Words that tasted like rust in storms and deep sea pressure. And for a moment, I felt her there on the other side of the wall, waiting, listening, responding. They broke in an hour later. 5 men, suits, tranquilizers. No questions, no talking. I woke up strapped down in a different room. Concrete. One light overhead. One-way mirror. No bed, no spiral. Just a chair and a drain in the floor. Dr. Harlan came again. Her expression was cracked glass. "You're not just a survivor, Will," she said. "You're a conduit now." I laughed. Couldn't help it. "For what?" She didn't answer, but the man behind the glass did. The speaker crackled to life with static, and then a single hollow phrase. "The host has begun translation. Initiate phase 2. As the light overhead flickered, Will heard his own voice, recorded, speaking a phrase he didn't remember saying, a command in the ancient language. On the floor, the drain began to bubble. They stopped calling it a facility. They called it a containment field, and I wasn't a patient anymore. I was the vector. I was awake when they moved me. No sedatives this time. Just 4 guards, full hazmat suits, and orders not to make eye contact. They strapped me into a rolling gurney like I was radioactive, wheeling me through a long underground corridor that stank of bleach, salt, and secrets. The walls were damp, the air was colder now, and somewhere in the distance, metal creaked like old ships being torn apart underwater. No one spoke. Until the door opened. Room 19. That number again. Same number printed on the data log from the S-18. Same number on the camera timestamp when we'd first seen the mermaid. If you could even call that thing a mermaid, not with its lidless eyes and the way its mouth opened the wrong direction. They called this room the crosslink chamber. I later learned it was originally built to test deep sea pressurizations on cadavers during Cold War era bioexperiments. Now, it had only one purpose: to find out what I had become. They left me strapped to a medical chair, upright, arms outstretched, wires, tubes, EG nodes, a mouth clamp I couldn't bite through. The ceiling above was lined with red emergency lights that never blinked, and just beyond the window, a narrow hallway, empty. For now. I waited. Not for rescue, not for answers, but for her. They didn't show up with questions. They showed up with a corpse. It took me a moment to realize what it was. Jackson, or what was left of him, preserved in a heavy containment bag, pale as driftwood, eyes open but unfocused. "This is your friend," said a voice through the intercom, maybe Harlan's, distorted by static and layers of dispassion. Or what was once your friend. They wheeled him into the room. I started screaming, but the mouth clamp turned it into wet gurgling. "Let's see how deeply your mind is linked," the voice continued. "Let's see if she still responds when you're near death." And then they pumped something into my veins. Not a sedative, a stimulant. Pain ripped through my spine like a spinal tap gone wrong. My thoughts blurred. Symbols began crawling over the walls in phosphorescent lines. Symbols I knew, but couldn't have possibly created. The same symbols we saw carved in the trench. The spiral, the eye, the sigil of the broken moon. I blinked. Jackson's corpse twitched. No, not a corpse. His hand was moving. Somewhere inside my skull, pressure began building, like seawater behind a cracked hull. Then, pop. Something opened. I wasn't in the room anymore. I was beneath it, beneath everything. I stood at the bottom of the trench again, but this time I wasn't in a diving suit. I had gills. I could feel them slit and open along my neck. My hands weren't hands. They were webbed, long-fingered things that shimmered with bioluminescent blue. She was there. Not outside me, but in me. The mermaid. The goddess. The ancient voice that spoke in spiral tongues. And she was singing. I felt my body harmonize with it. Felt her hunger radiating like sonar. Each note was a command, and each beat matched the drumming of my own heart. 1 beat. Breathe. 2 beats. Open back in the real world. I came to, gasping, eyes wide. Jackson was gone again, or maybe he had never moved, but the symbols, they were burned into the walls now. Not paint, not light, flesh. The wall pulsed with veins. Something alive had crawled through me. The intercom crackled. Phase 3 begins. The interface is successful. A pause. Then, prepare the rest. I struggled against the restraints, but the more I fought, the deeper the bindings seemed to cut. I looked down. My wrists were bleeding, but not red. Blue. Thick. Iridescent. Glowing. Not blood. Spore. My cells were changing. She wasn't just speaking through me anymore. She was using me. For the first time in weeks, the door opened. Not guards this time. Dr. Harlan. She stepped in, no mask, no fear in her eyes, only cold resignation. "You weren't supposed to survive, Will," she said softly. "But maybe survival was never the point." She reached into her coat and pulled out a syringe. "This is going to burn," she said, "but it'll show us how far gone you really are." The serum surged through me like molten ice. My teeth clenched involuntarily, and a low groan escaped my throat, not from pain, but from the hunger. Not mine, hers. My vision darkened at the edges, like the ocean swallowing light. I could see the world peeling apart in layers: skin, bone, thought, memory, time. What remained beneath wasn't Will anymore. It was something older, something called. Dr. Harlan stared at me, waiting for a reaction. "You're hearing her now, aren't you?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My eyes told her everything. She nodded, strangely calm. "Then it's time." They took me out of room 19, not with violence. No straps, no sedation, just obedience. Mine. I walked without resistance through sterile corridors until we reached the lower level. Sub 4, a section sealed decades ago after a structural collapse. Lie. It wasn't collapsed. It was buried beneath the earth, beneath the base, beneath reason. The hall leading there was lined with rusted observation windows, sealed chambers, and cages that had been broken from the inside. Symbols, familiar ones, were carved into the metal, glowing faintly. This place wasn't designed to keep things out. It was meant to keep something in. At the far end stood a vault door, thick as a submarine hull, painted across its surface in smeared red. "Do not descend." They opened it anyway. The stairs beyond were slick with condensation. Faint echoes rolled up from the dark like whispers trapped in stone. Dr. Harlan walked ahead, torch in hand, eyes focused, reverent even. "We didn't find her," she said, almost to herself. "She found us." The S-18 was no accident. It was her beacon. I stopped. "The crew, she tested them," she said softly. "You and Jackson were the only ones she chose." The horror of it clicked into place. All those months, all those drills, the selection process. We weren't trained to survive. We were bred to submit. The stairwell ended in an ancient tunnel, clearly not built by the US Navy. Stone walls, slimy and curved like a ribcage, ran on forever. As we moved forward, the lights faded until we stood in darkness lit only by bioluminescent fungi, spreading in pulsating webs along the floor and ceiling. Then came the chanting. Not English, not Latin. Something older, wetter, like the sea itself was trying to speak. Figures stood ahead in robes of 6 of them, surrounding a pool carved into the stone. The water inside wasn't black. It was alive, shifting with shapes not meant for the surface world. Tentacles, faces, things that blinked without eyes. Harlan turned to me. "You'll drink." "No," I breathed, but my legs were already moving. She held the cup in her hands, an ancient vessel carved with that same spiral and eye sigil. "Drink, Will," she said. "You are her voice now." The liquid smelled like salt and blood. I drank, and the world split. I was everywhere at once, in the trench, in the S-18, in the crosslink chamber, in Harlan's mind, in Jackson's dying breath. I felt every scream echoing in the depths, every sacrifice, every broken mind. I saw the first offering, a whaling ship in 1831 that went missing near this trench. The crew had gone mad. One man carved out his tongue to stop hearing the singing. Another jumped overboard with weights tied to his ankles, smiling all the way down. I saw the second awakening. WWWII submariners who reported mermaids in sonar only to vanish days later. I saw the third, our mission, and now the fourth, me. I came back gasping, face inches from the pool, hands webbed and trembling. The robed figures fell silent. Harlan kneeled before me. "It is done," she said. "You are the vessel." A tremor shook the chamber. No, not a tremor, a heartbeat. From beneath the pool, the water split open, and she rose, not like a human, not like a god, like both. Her hair floated like kelp, her limbs bending at wrong angles, her eyes reflecting my own face over and over and over. She looked at me, into me, and spoke, not in sound but in flood. My ears bled, my mind cracked, and somewhere inside something hatched. As the others bowed before her, I did not. I smiled, not with joy but with knowledge, because I remembered what Jackson had told me once, right before we descended the S-18. If you stare too long into the deep doesn't just stare back, it invites you in. And I had just accepted the invitation. The first thing I remember after the ceremony was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the kind that comes when the ocean holds its breath, like the world knew something had crossed over. I stood in the stone chamber, soaked in that black ichor that wasn't quite water. My skin still tingled where she had touched me, not with fingers, but with thought. Her will coiled inside me now, like a parasite of purpose. I wasn't a man anymore. I was her messenger. Around me, the robed figures wept in awe. Dr. Harlan knelt beside the ancient basin, whispering words I no longer needed to translate. The meaning came to me like instinct. The tide has chosen. The vessel lives. Behind her, the pool no longer rippled. It breathed. It had become a gate. They called it the reawakening. I called it the beginning of the drowning. We returned to the upper levels in silence. The corridors of Crosslink Base felt even more hollow than before. No alarms, no footsteps, no human presence. Only flickering lights and the low groan of metal stressed by unseen pressures. That's when I noticed the water. At first, just a thin film along the floor. Then puddles, then streams. Salt water, flowing upward from the lower decks. No one seemed alarmed except me. I passed what was left of room 19. The window was cracked, the glass smeared with bloody fingerprints and symbols. Inside the chair where they had restrained me was empty, straps still buckled. Beside it, a recording monitor blinked faintly. I leaned in. It was playing footage, black and white, grainy, not of me, but of Jackson. He was strapped down, just like I had been, writhing in silence as Dr. Harlan injected him with the same serum. His eyes rolled back. Then he froze. Still. Then he whispered something. Only one word, but it was enough to freeze the blood in my veins. Return. Then the screen went black. Return to where? Or who? I was spiraling. My mind, once clear and sharp, now felt split, as if part of me was still in that chamber, still kneeling, still submerged in her thought. I clutched the side wall, trying to breathe. That's when I saw the trench map. One of the hallway's displays had flickered back on. It showed the Mariana Trench, but not as it had ever appeared in textbooks. The topography had changed. Deep fissures radiated outward from the Challenger Deep, like cracks in a dam. Symbols, ancient ones, appeared along the edges, pulsing. The ocean floor was moving, and not randomly. It was opening. Back in the main control room, I found Harlan standing before the mission log screen. She didn't turn when I entered, just said, softly, "It's almost time." I could barely find my voice. Time for what? She finally turned. For them to rise. On the screen behind her, sonar images rolled. Creatures, hundreds, maybe thousands, moved in unison through the dark. Some looked like serpents. Others resembled human skeletons twisted into impossible proportions. One had too many limbs. Another had no face at all, just a smooth surface that reflected nothing but your own reflection, screaming silently. "They were never myths," she whispered. "Only exiles." I stepped closer. "And now?" Her eyes gleamed. "Now they come home." Suddenly, the base shook. Not a tremor, an impact. An alarm finally blared. "Breach detected. Sub 4 through Sub 2. Flooding in progress." Harlan didn't flinch. "Let them see her work." I turned to run, but she grabbed my wrist. "You're not going anywhere, Will. You are the conduit. You'll guide the next wave." Her grip was inhumanly strong. Her eyes, no longer fully hers. I twisted free and sprinted down the corridor, heart hammering. Behind me, the chanting started again. It wasn't human anymore. It wasn't even sound. It was pulling. I burst into the corridors and locked myself in. Salt water was already creeping under the door. I grabbed the emergency radio. "No signal." I flipped the switch to the black box recorder, standard for deep-sea missions. Started dictating everything. My hands shook. My skin felt too tight. My throat tasted of brine. And behind my eyes, I could feel her, watching, waiting, wanting. I screamed at the walls. "This is a warning to anyone who hears this. Don't go down there. Don't trust them." And then, knocking, 3 slow knocks on the door behind me. Not banging, not fists, knuckles. Soft, repeating. Like someone politely waiting to be let in. I turned and saw the water level rise just beneath the knob, and from the radio through the static, a whisper. "Let us in, Will. We remember you." As I backed away from the door, it opened on its own, slowly, salt water pouring in, along with bare footprints appearing on the floor with every invisible step forward. I realized then they didn't need to break in. They were already inside me. The price of knowing. The footprints kept coming, wet, invisible, unmistakably human. They led from the door to the center of my quarters, each step pressing a shallow imprint into the steel floor, water steaming gently around the edges. But there was no figure, no form. Just presence. I couldn't move. My legs had turned to anchors. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the growing puddles spreading from the door, like a tide with no source. I clenched my fists, trying to will myself to act, to scream, to fight. But her voice was already there, inside me, humming behind every heartbeat. "You opened the way. Now carry it." A cold pressure crawled up my spine. Not occupation. Something was settling inside me. I turned and ran, out the quarters, through the flooding corridor, past bulkheads that groaned and twisted as if the ocean itself were pressing its ear to the walls. The lights dimmed, flickered, and died behind me one by one, like eyelids slowly closing. I didn't stop until I reached the control room, or what was left of it. The place was nearly submerged. Consoles sparked beneath waist-deep water. Dead monitors blinked static. Above the waterline, a body floated, arms spread, mouth wide in a final frozen scream. Dr. Harlan. Her face was bloated but peaceful. Too peaceful. I knew why. She had offered herself to her. I stumbled backward, choking on panic. A wall panel flashed red. Escape Pod 3. Ready. That's when I heard Jackson. His voice, real, strained, echoed from behind the half-submerged chamber door. "Will, help me!" I froze. That voice had no right to still exist. I moved toward the source, stepping through the water now swirling in slow circles, pulling toward the central drain like it had its own mind. I forced open the panel. Inside was the med bay, and Jackson was there. Alive. Sort of. He sat slumped in a corner, soaked, shirtless, his torso branded with the same markings I had seen on the trench walls. His eyes were clouded white, pupils gone, but he saw me. "You came back. What the hell did they do to you?" They didn't do it, he whispered. She did. Through them. He coughed. Salt water leaked from his lungs. He didn't even flinch. You have to leave, he rasped. She's finished choosing. I saw you die. You saw the beginning. The base shook again. This time, not from pressure, but from movement. Not above, below. Jackson grabbed my wrist with sudden strength. Take it back. Take the recorder. Get it out. Tell them. She's not in the ocean anymore. I stared at him, horrified. He smiled, his teeth black with algae. She's walking now. His body seized, convulsed, cracked, and then split. From within him, arms unfurled, slim, translucid, jointless, not human. I turned and ran. Escape pod 3, only one left. I dove in, sealed the hatch, and slammed the emergency eject. There was no countdown, no guidance, just a scent. The pod shuddered as it rose through the collapsing depths of the trench. Around me, the hull groaned like it was screaming. Outside, in the small viewport, something followed. Huge, dark, fluid, keeping pace with impossible ease. Not swimming, not chasing, just watching. The lights flickered. She whispered again. You carry me now. I don't remember reaching the surface. They told me I was found drifting off the coast of Guam in a lifeboat with no identification, no records, no logs. The escape pod had been reduced to twisted metal. They asked me about Crosslink, about the S-18. I said I remembered nothing. A lie. Now, I sit alone in a debriefing room in a naval facility, whose name they won't tell me. They run scans on my brain every night. They whisper when they think I can't hear. They talk about psychic contamination and pattern leakage. They call it the Leviathan Protocol. They think I'm the only one who made it out. They're wrong. I'm not the only one. She's here. I see it in the salt that forms in the corners of my room. I hear it in the humming of the fluorescent lights. I dream of the trench every night. I wake with my lungs wet and aching, and I know one day soon I'll walk into the ocean again. Last night I looked in the mirror. My eyes were no longer brown. They were black and glowing softly, like hers. And behind me, just for a second, the mirror didn't reflect me at all. It reflected the ocean floor. Thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, you're one of the few who now know. The sea doesn't just hide wreckage, it buries history, secrets, things that were never meant to be found. They told us the ocean was the final frontier. They were wrong. Some frontiers aren't meant to be crossed. Some doors, once opened, never close. If you ever hear humming in the water, if the tide feels like it's pulling your thoughts instead of your feet, don't answer it. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing, leaving a comment, or sharing it with someone who still believes the ocean is just water. Until next time, sleep with the lights on, and never, ever dive too deep.